Namaskar, welcome to PK's classes. Today we will study G protein coupled receptor adenylate cyclase cyclic AMP pathway. So G protein coupled receptor, we call it as G protein coupled receptor because G stands for guanine nucleotide binding protein coupled receptor. So guanine nucleotides are GDP or GTP, and G protein has three subunits alpha, beta and gamma, and when GDP is bound to alpha, it is in resting state. When GDP is exchanged with GTP, alpha GTP becomes active and it will be separated from beta gamma. Alpha GTP and beta gamma are the two active subunits of this G protein, and they can bind to specific targets called effectors, which may be either enzyme or ion channel. Enzyme may be adenylate cyclase or phospholipase, and ion channel may be potassium or calcium. And when the enzyme is adenylate cyclase, it will convert ATP to cyclic AMP, and this cyclic AMP acts as the second messenger. So let us see. So when there is no drug binding or agonist binding or ligand binding, so there will be in the receptor is in the resting state in which alpha is bound to GDP. When the ligand binds to the receptor, GDP-GTP exchange occurs, and alpha GTP now gets separated from beta gamma and the receptor, and because it is freely diffusible on the cell membrane, it moves on the cell membrane to its specific target or effector. And for GS type of G protein coupled receptor, the effector is adenylate cyclase. So it will activate the adenylate cyclase and there will be formation of the cyclic AMP, which is the second messenger. So when the ligand binds, alpha S GTP gets dissociated from the receptor and will bind to the target or effector adenylate cyclase, where ATP is converted to cyclic AMP. Now this cyclic AMP activates protein kinase A. So this protein kinase A in its inactive form has two regulatory subunits and two catalytic subunits, and the four molecules of cyclic AMP can bind to these two regulatory subunits and will release these two catalytic subunits, which are the active protein kinase A, and this active protein kinase A can produce the cellular functions. So let us see one example. One example is thyrotrophin receptor or receptor of thyroid stimulating hormone, where the active protein kinase A, that is the active catalytic subunit, enters into the nucleus and phosphorylates and activates cyclic AMP response element bound protein CREB, which will recruit the co-activator CREB binding protein CBP. CREB and CBP complex will bind to the cyclic AMP response elements present in the DNA, and that will cause gene transcription. So because of gene transcription, there will be synthesis and secretion of the thyroid hormone T3 and T4. Let us take another example, beta 2 adrenergic receptor, which is a GS type of G protein coupled receptor, where the effector is adenylate cyclase and again cyclic AMP is produced. Cyclic AMP activates protein kinase A, and this protein kinase A will phosphorylate the myosin light chain kinase and make it inactive. So there will be no phosphorylation of myosin, and actin myosin binding will not occur, so that will result in relaxation of smooth muscle. Let us see that example. Myosin light chain kinase, when activated in presence of calcium calmodulin complex, phosphorylates myosin to myosin phosphate. Now this myosin has the energy to bind with actin, and there will be actin myosin binding, which causes contraction of vascular smooth muscles. And when this enzyme, and if you see this enzyme, there are sites, calcium calmodulin binding sites, two sites are there. This is the catalytic site in which ATP binding site is also there, and there is one site for myosin binding site and the other site is actin binding site. So calcium calmodulin complex, by binding to MLCK, activates MLCK, And when this protein kinase A phosphorylates MLCK, what happens? The affinity of MLCK for calcium calmodulin decreases because of phosphorylation of MLCK, and the decrease in catalytic activity of MLCK occurs. There will be no phosphorylation, no actin myosin binding, and that will result in relaxation of smooth muscles. So in this way, the adenylate cyclase cyclic AMP pathway occurs in different types of receptors. Thank you.